All right, so today we are going to be listening to the presentation, Fostering Interprofessional Collaborative Practice Among Nurses. It is with great pleasure that I introduce you to our speaker for today. Kinsa Malik is a clinical leader for the Interprofessional Resource Team at St. Michael's Hospital. She also holds a dual role as a program advisor and course instructor within the Faculty of Health Sciences and Wellness at Humber College. In her spare time, Kinsa works with the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario as the president of the Men in Nursing Interest Group, or MINIG. Overall, Kinsa is passionate about quality improvement, education, and mentorship. Welcome, Kinsa.
We just have a paging announcement, so I'll get started in just a second, okay?
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Of course, this happened right before I have to present. So as Patricia mentioned, I'm currently the clinical leader manager for the IRT or Interprofessional Resource Team here at St. Michael's Hospital, which is also a fancy term for a float team. And today, what I'm really going to be discussing is fostering intraprofessional collaborative practice among nurses. The research on intraprofessional collaborative practice is quite limited. There tends to be heavy emphasis on interprofessional collaborative practice. And so it's important to discuss and open up the communication in terms of what intraprofessional collaborative practice is and how that looks like in the clinical context. So as previously mentioned, it's important to define what intraprofessional collaboration is and what its significance is as well. So intraprofessional collaboration is really looking at the field of nursing and determining the collaboration among nurses in various capacities. So an example might be registered nurses to registered practical nurses. Another option or potential might be nurses to nurse practitioners. So intraprofessional collaboration encompasses really throughout the trajectory of nursing. For the purposes of this particular presentation, there was emphasis on the collaborative aspect or collaborative relationships amongst registered nurses and registered practical nurses. So that's what the focus is for this particular presentation. And in terms of the significance of intraprofessional collaboration, it's very important that there is role clarity, there is cohesiveness, and overall a sense of teamwork and sense of belonging when individuals, despite coming from the nursing profession, are coming with different skills, knowledge, and judgment, depending on the zone or area in which they are representing nursing as a whole. And so it's very important for us to uncover those elements and take a deep dive in terms of what are the distinct roles and responsibilities within the field of nursing itself. And so really what's the fundamental or most important aspect of conducting the BPG project or the best practice guideline project is really honing that problem. What is the issue? What is the problem? And identifying the problem on the outset of the project is very important because it provides your direction in terms of what the aim is for what the project will be. So in this particular case, the problem was that the majority of nurses within one of the specific units that we have here at St. Michael's Hospital, the nephrology, urology, and transplant unit, were unclear about the distinct roles and responsibilities of RPNs in relation to RNs. And to give a little bit of context, traditionally, St. Michael's Hospital has been an RN-only hospital. However, with a rise in patient acuity, a rise in patient flow, we've had to be very creative with our staffing complements. And so most recently, we have started to accommodate RPNs to assist us with the shortages and with the patient flow and acuity. And In integrating RPNs into the hospital, there were a couple of units that were piloting this project to see how we can fully integrate RPNs into the model. And the nephrology urology transplant unit was one of those units that was piloting this project. And so it was very important for us to start out with a needs assessment to really determine, okay, what is the current state of knowledge, the current state of affairs, and interview or survey the staff themselves to determine where there might be gaps. And so for this particular project, the problem that was identified was that there was actually no role clarity in terms of what would be the expectations from an RPN standpoint versus the expectations from an RN standpoint. And so that's what the purpose of the project was. And so with this pie chart here, you can see that 57% of the staff, and I should say that there were 21 nurses that were interviewed or surveyed. And so 57% indicated that they somewhat knew the distinct roles and responsibilities of the RPNs in relation to RNs. 5% said no, and we only had a 38% rate of individuals indicating that yes, they were fully aware of the distinct roles and responsibilities of RPNs in the context of the unit. And so what our purpose was for this quality improvement initiative was to promote patient care protocols, role clarity, and mentorship efforts in an effort to establish a high level of intraprofessional collaboration among RPNs and RNs in acute care settings. And we were going to pilot this in the nephrology urology transplant unit at St. Michael's Hospital. And so if we look at the interventions and the processes that we put in place, it was really a two-pronged approach. So we tried to address these gaps and ensure that there was a sense of belonging amongst RPNs and RNs by introducing role clarity documents as one of the strategies. And then the second strategy that we implemented was a mentorship initiative. The idea here was that the role clarity documents and the role clarity aspect of the initiative would address some of the gaps in knowledge pertaining to the specific roles and responsibilities of RPNs in comparison to RNs, whereas the mentorship initiative was more so to create more of an environment, an inclusive environment, where both mentees and mentors have an opportunity to engage in professional development whilst promoting some belongingness on the unit. And so when we look at the role clarity documents that were created, we had developed a unit-specific assignment guide for unit leaders or charge nurses that was based on the CNO three-factor framework. And so this unit-specific guide allowed charge nurses or unit leaders on the nephrology urology transplant unit to assign patients based on this unit-specific assignment guide. The second document that we developed was that we designed a step-by-step algorithm for an unexpected rise in patient acuity and instability that highlight the specific actions to be taken if a patient becomes unstable under an RPN's care. The traditional models of care suggested that if an RPN was overseeing a patient that became suddenly acute or unstable, that they would then transfer the care automatically to the RN. Of course, in our particular case, we had done some research and we had determined that perhaps rather than ultimately transferring care from the RPN to the RN, we will develop this algorithm that is evidence-informed using unit context information as well as scholarly literature to help us determine what is the best way we can build capacity of the RPN whilst still promoting that care under the RPN, but still so that they feel guided. So we created an assignment or a step-by-step algorithm, which I will show you in the next upcoming slide on how we achieved that. And so that covers the role clarity aspect. In terms of the mentorship aspect, really what we did, we created a peer mentorship program that was available on a voluntary basis. So we had mentors and mentees fill out surveys, and based on those surveys, we would pair them on similarities and interests. We would then pair the mentor and mentee to fill out a relationship contract and determine mutually beneficial timelines of when they will be able to fulfill these timelines. And then we also had the mentees, to build their capacity, help create a learning plan with learning goals in conjunction with the mentor and ourselves, okay, who were the BPG project leads. So essentially, we were looking at two main components. In terms of the algorithm for patient instability, this may be difficult to read. And so I will just generally walk you through what the sort of main idea here was. The idea here is that if a patient was under the care of an RPN, and let's say that patient became suddenly acutely unstable, the RPN or the experienced RN or inexperienced RN would consult an experienced RN to assess stability. So the first step was to consult someone that is more senior. In the case where the patient is rapidly declining, we had created a sort of model where if yes, the patient is rapidly declining, please go ahead and contact the critical care resource team and the physician and or resident. If in this case, the patient was not rapidly declining, we would say that you would continue to monitor the patient on the inpatient unit while considering or consulting an experienced RN. Okay, so you can see here that the next line here says that is the patient considered stable? If yes, then care would be continued by the RPN in collaboration with the experienced RN. If not, if the patient was not considered stable, the RPN or the inexperienced RN would provide TOA to the more experienced or senior nurse, and then the assignment would be readjusted by the unit leader. So if at any point the RPN did feel that they were not able to manage the patient is unstable, that would be the point where transfer of care would occur, okay? And so if we look on the part of the diagram where they consult CCRT, we close the loop by saying, is the patient going to be sent to the ICU for transfer? If not, again, continue to monitor the patient on the inpatient unit and consult as required. If the patient was to be taken to the ICU for transfer, the idea was that an experienced nurse, experienced RN, would assist the RPN in giving TOA to the ICU nurse. Okay, and we created a priority order that really who is that nurse that's going to assist in TOA. We start off with it being the break partner. If the break partner is unavailable, it will then go to the unit leader or charge nurse. And if the unit leader or charge nurse was unavailable, it would then move over to the clinical nurse educator. And what was really good was with this algorithm, we had continuously consulted the leadership of the unit to ensure that everyone would be okay with this process, okay? And this is going to be one of the main takeaways for your projects, is just ensuring that all the key stakeholders are well informed. That will make your initiative stronger as you go through. So that was our algorithm that we had created. In terms of the results of our initiative, we had done sort of pre-initiative and post-initiative survey questions, as I mentioned, with 21 participants. All of those participants, of course, being RNs, because at this particular stage, we were still in the mid-integration of the RPNs. And so the question was, do you feel confident about your roles and responsibilities in this unit? So again, in terms of pre-initiative, we had 15 out of 21 participants indicating yes. And then post-initiative, this had increased to 85.7%. So we did see a positive, overall positive response. With the introduction of RPNs, are you aware of their roles and responsibilities in your unit? You can see that pre-initiative, as mentioned at the beginning slide, 38% indicated yes. Post-initiative, 85.7% indicated yes. If a patient assigned to an RPN becomes acutely unstable, are you aware of the steps to take? Pre-initiative, 33% of those participants indicated yes. Post-initiative, we jumped to 90.4% that selected yes. So overall, quite positive in terms of our initiative. For the conclusion, overall, we did find that the mentees and mentors reported overall satisfaction with the mentorship program. We had verbally asked them if they would be interested in continuing the mentorship program, and both groups, both pairs did indicate that they would participate again if there was an opportunity on the unit to continue the mentorship. And in terms of the implications for leadership, we found that nurse leaders should really be prioritizing intraprofessional collaboration as a part of sustaining a healthy work environment, but also to ensure that effective patient care is delivered by having that effective teamwork take place. Efforts to promote role clarity and mentorship opportunities should be introduced to ensure a positive work environment and optimal patient outcomes. And in terms of strategies for sustainability, I think these are very key components to take home or take away. Engage leaders and stakeholders in the initiative. For sure, this was something that we constantly kept our stakeholders in the loop, both the frontline staff and the leaders, so that everyone would be on the same page. We did appoint champions that could propel our initiative forward and ensure that everyone is well aware of what it is that the initiative is aiming to do. And then considering introducing the change incrementally. When I get to some of the key takeaways in this presentation, I will speak to the fact that change can typically be quite overwhelming. The time frame in which we had initiated this particular initiative was in the crux of the COVID-19 pandemic. We had introduced this initiative roughly in 2020 to 2021. And so you can anticipate and probably imagine that there were many changes occurring during this time, and we were still successful in implementing the change, but we did so very slowly, incrementally, and we constantly made sure that the unit, the frontline staff and leadership were continuously being informed of what was happening, just so that they wouldn't feel overwhelmed. Okay. And so this brings me to some of the shared learnings that I myself have learned as a BPG champion, but also as being a BPG mentor, which I've moved into for this year. And so the first point of clarification and sort of takeaway is to start as early as possible. It's very important to set timelines, set goals early on. It can be very challenging when you're chasing time, quite like what is pictured here in this image. It can be very challenging to catch up, and these initiatives tend to be quite huge, especially if you are introducing a significant change on a unit. It's very important to be mindful of timelines, mindful of the frontline staff, and of course, mindful of the contextual issues that might be happening, right? So for instance, the COVID-19 pandemic, or factoring unexpected issues that you might come across as you go through the project. The second point here is to stay organized. And so some useful tools that I used in my project was organizing a calendar. I had used a shared calendar with my co-BPG champion because this was a shared project. So we made sure that we had a shared calendar where we could mark our deadlines and ensure that we're both on the same page, understanding and appreciating that things do change, but it is important to have a calendar at the very least to have some tentative deadlines. We also, again, had a chart of expected deadlines, and then if anything would change, we would be constantly communicating about those changes. And then, of course, a Gantt chart with timelines. And so with the Gantt chart, really, if you look into it, it's just making sure that you're setting out your planning phase, your intervention stage, the stage at which you're evaluating. That's a very key component. You want to make sure that there's enough time for an evaluation period, and then, of course, go from there. So a Gantt chart would be something that I would recommend. The third key takeaway, with which I believe I mentioned already, is to engage your stakeholders. Always communicate regularly through email, various channels, huddles, bulletin boards, and focus groups. This also includes sharing the results. It's very important, especially when you're introducing an initiative, to explain the rationale for the initiative, right? We want to be mindful of the frontline staff, or of the staff that you will be implementing this for, being mindful of their timelines, their restraints, their constraints. And so it's important to keep in mind and explain to them, what is the data saying on the unit? And this is what we would do in our project. We would constantly say to our stakeholders that, listen, the reason we're introducing this initiative is that, there's only 33% or 30% of staff on the unit that are actually truly aware of what the RPNs and RNs are doing in this unit. And so that gave us some buy-in by continuously engaging them and consulting them for their feedback. So that brings us to the next point of expecting and embracing resistance. So some of the factors here that are mentioned are reasons why you may see that there is resistance to change. For instance, perhaps better processes are needed. So if there's something that you're doing or something that you've introduced that's way too convoluted, perhaps that might be a feedback that you want to take back from your staff and appreciate or try to revise in order to determine, might there be a better way of doing this or streamlining this process to make it a little easier for the staff. As I mentioned, more data might be needed. It is oftentimes a common trap of introducing an initiative is ignoring the problem and skipping onto the intervention. There is a tendency sometimes to skip the problem and just move into what are you going to do about it. It's very important to do your problem analysis, understand the problem, understand the facets of the problem, what might be contributing to the problem before executing or implementing. You need to be clear on what the problem is in order to effectively implement. So that might be another reason for resistance. More time might be needed. As I said, we had introduced our initiative sort of in the crux of the pandemic. So we had to be very mindful of time and allowing the staff to absorb what we were introducing. And then finally, maybe more people might be needed for the change. A good example, as I mentioned, was appointing some champions that might be able to assist you in propelling that initiative forward. So buy-in is very important. As I mentioned a couple of times in this presentation, context is everything. So know who your key stakeholders are. This should be one of the first things you're doing for your project. And then, of course, being mindful of any workloads and burnout. One of the key components that I always like to tell BPG champions is to trust the process. It can feel that there's a lot to do, and the timelines sometimes feel that they are bleeding into the next year or bleeding several months into the process. Trust the process, map out your timelines, and give yourself enough time to be able to really appreciate the problem and really execute something that is of high quality. Some additional helpful tools that I used in my experience. Canva is an awesome resource that can be used to create posters or infographics. That might be something that you want to send out to staff, for instance, to get more engagement and have more of a visual as opposed to the traditional huddles or emails. And then, of course, using the Google Drive has been phenomenal for me because I was able to do some information sharing with my key stakeholders, particularly the leadership, who would have an opportunity to revise our work by accessing the drive. Okay. And so the final comment is just to share your hard work. So this was the poster that we created, myself and my partner, Ronald. And we were able to visually construct this poster, and it's currently posted in the unit specifically. But it's a good idea to make sure that once you get through the project, making sure that you have the appropriate channels to share that information. For example, you may want to share it in a conference, which I've done with this project as well. So just being mindful that there are endless opportunities with the project that you create. And it's important to share that work because it advances our profession with the research. Okay, and so just to close, I'd like to acknowledge Ronald Ordinario. This was my co-BPG champion that helped me integrate the initiative. And then I also have Art Jerome Lopez, Jessica Directo, Jumi Charles, and Michelle Gabriel, who provided us mentorship along our project. And a final special thank you to the nephrology, urology, and transplant unit staff and additional mentors that we had. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kinza, for such a brilliant presentation on fostering interprofessional collaborative practice among nurses. And again, thank you for taking us through the Quality Improvement Initiative, as well as discussing the two-pronged intervention that your team implemented, the role clarity documents and the mentorship initiative. Truly, I appreciate the discussion of your shared learnings, and I believe that other people, organizations, and leaders will find your presentation helpful as well. So at this time, we're ready to take some questions from the audience. So there were some couple of questions that were in the chat box. I can bring them up to you. So we did have a question about, would you be able to share the UL specific assignment guide to support as an example? Do you?
Patricia, I do have that document somewhere. I am totally fine with sharing that specific assignment guide. I think that maybe Dana had asked about that.
Sure. Okay.
I'm totally fine, but just being mindful that it is context and unit specific.
Yeah, that's very important to note. Yes, it's because it's very specific to your context. So I think you have if we can take any questions, if maybe they can email us if you have further questions, or you also have your email as well. So we can forward any questions to you if anybody wants to find out about that. I have another question. It was how many units at St. Mike's now have an RN RPN model? Are you planning to add RNs in specialized areas such as hemodialysis, ICU, etc.?
Jeffrey, it's an excellent question. How I will answer that is that currently at St. Mike's, as I said, we were traditionally RN only. With the sort of the issues that we were having with patient flow, acuity, and staffing in general, staffing shortages, what I can say to you is that we now have every unit essentially takes RNs and RPNs. There are a couple of restrictions, which you clearly mentioned here. ICU is still a restriction for RPNs, and I would think that that's possibly across the board. We also, first, it's interesting that you mentioned hemo. That's another area that's still restricted to RN only. And recently, trauma neurosurgery is a specialized area that is trialing RPNs. So they have about 1 or 2 that they've just started quite recently, within a month or so. And if that goes well, I anticipate more RPNs will be coming. So really all units take RPNs here now at St. Michael's Hospital. The only areas that don't are very specialized: hematology, oncology, ICU settings. And then of course, trauma neurosurgery used to be RN only, but they are now trialing with 1 or 2 RPNs.
Thanks, Kinsa. And then there's a follow-up question about what is your suggested RN-RPN ratio per shift?
So the suggested RN-RPN ratio is 4. That's a standard across what we do at St. Michael's Hospital. So in an ideal world, and I think that question also came from Jeffrey, that is our standard, typically 1 to 4 ratio.
Kinsa, there's a couple of comments saying thanking you for this informative and clear presentation and for sharing it with the audience. And I have another question about, are there any plans to conduct any longitudinal studies with the first group? Also, are there any plans to conduct comparative studies between units?
I think I see this question from Nicole. It's an excellent question. Nicole, there are problems and issues, logistically speaking, with longitudinal studies. It's very hard to capture the same nurses over an extended period of time, and we are seeing quite a bit of attrition, not just in this particular unit, but across the board. And so that was not something that was in our initial plans. We had initially integrated this, and to be very honest, this was on a hope and a promise, right? So we had done it more of a short term, but we did have interest from the leadership to continue it. It's just a matter of logistically, how do they continue it with the current climate of nursing shortages, burnout, et cetera. So it is something that they would like to continue beyond what we've already done. It's just a matter of logistically figuring out how do we support the nurses so that the mentors don't feel burnt out, so that people still feel supported as they go through, and work with people on the units, right? So unfortunately, no plans to conduct a longitudinal study, although that would have been a fantastic suggestion. And then conducting comparative studies between units would be phenomenal. This work was very microscopic. It was done at a unit level and just in one particular unit, but I would anticipate and probably suggest that other units adapt some of these mechanisms. The challenge is that every unit CLM or every unit has its own leadership, so they may view things differently, may need things differently. So their unit assignment guide would be very different from the unit assignment guide that we created from nephrology. But I think it's an excellent suggestion, and perhaps if this work, if I continue in with this work, that would be something that I would be interested in doing, that conducting that comparative analysis among units. It's an excellent point. Thanks for sharing, Nicole.
Thank you, Kinsa. I'm just noticing another question about what strategies did you use to receive buy-in from frontline staff nurses?
That's an excellent question. And I think that for buy-in for staff nurses, it's very important to explain the context, to explain why you are introducing the initiative. These nurses, these frontline staff were inundated with information on the daily with the COVID-19 pandemic being quite new. There was a lot of fear, there was a lot of uncertainty. So it was important to approach this very empathetically. Although it is a project, it was important to understand that there are human beings that are the ones that are driving that change. We are just facilitating. They are the ones that are actually propelling it and ensuring that it's integrated in the unit. And so it was important to approach it very empathetically. It was important to approach it from a lens of, these are the gaps, and what we're trying to do is address those gaps, as opposed to, this is what we're going to be doing. You have to move forward with it. We approached it by saying, we had huddles, we had various channels of communication, and we had explained the rationale to sort of support the importance of the initiative. And that in itself was very valued by the team. The fact that we came out and we were very transparent with them in explaining, this is the data that we've received from you, this is what it tells us, and this is what we're aiming to do. We would also ask for suggestions where reasonable, because of course, sometimes you don't want to have a whole list of suggestions. It has to be feasible, it has to be timely, but we would at times, when we were stuck with something, we would consult the staff nurses themselves and just say, hey, this is what the timeline is that we're looking at. These are some of the initiatives we're looking at. What else, what other recommendations might you have? And so we open the floor to give them that opportunity to share in both the survey, but also verbally through huddles in case people didn't feel comfortable writing out what their suggestions were. And then in terms of buy-in from staff, of course, timelines, right? So just making sure that we're being mindful of their workloads, making sure we're doing frequent check-ins. They really did appreciate the presence of us being there as the champions, as opposed to just writing emails. They were happy to see us. We would physically come in for huddles for both the night shift and the day shift. And the staff really appreciated that opportunity. So those were the key strategies for frontline staff. And I would highly recommend involving leadership to support your initiative, because it makes it much easier. If you have the support of leadership, that leadership can assist you in integrating it, because they can, of course, remind the staff of what the expectation is, remind the staff that there is an initiative, and help support you, especially if they truly believe in that shared vision.
Thanks, Kinsa. That was such an excellent example of your stakeholder engagement and just empathetic implementation of a change initiative. So thank you for sharing that. I do have another question in the chat, and it was about, were the RPNs already on staff in the unit, and was there a challenge with staffing assignments?
It's an excellent question, and I think this is coming from Jackie. Thank you so much for the question. RPNs were already on the unit when this initiative was being rolled out. And so one of the things that my partner had mentioned to me was, hey, are we too late in rolling out this initiative? Because we are already accepting RPNs. Is it worth us doing this problem analysis now? And it was absolutely worth it, because again, this is where the importance of that needs assessment comes in, to say, is this an issue? In fact, it was an issue. And so to your point, Jackie, RPNs, a couple of them were already on the unit. They were already actively hiring RPNs. So that adds a layer of course, of complexity, because the RPNs are also on the unit. And so it's important to ensure that, with this initiative, we want to make sure that, if we don't want the RPNs or RNs to feel that they're being targeted, right? And that was very important in our initiative, to say, this is an open discussion. RPNs were invited into the in-services. They were consulted for their feedback to say, we want to make sure that everyone feels welcome. Right? We're not trying to create a separation between RPNs and RNs. We're trying to work together and come up with a collaborative solution that builds capacity for the RPNs, but also makes sure that the RNs don't feel overburdened with, always getting the higher acute patients, right? So they were already integrated in the unit, and we were actively, engaging the staff to determine, where are the gaps? How can we make this a better process? So it truly was quality improvement in that sense. And then with the challenge with staffing assignments at that particular time, Jackie, we were hiring RPNs. There were some challenges with staffing assignments, but I think with the unit specific guide, it really clarified what assignments can and cannot be done by the unit. What was good is that we had the engagement of the leadership. So we actually consulted the clinical nurse educator as well to say, okay, this is what the literature is saying. This is what CNO is saying. From a unit specific context, what circumstances would you never assign a patient, for example, to an RPN, versus what circumstances would you? And from that educator, we determined, unit specifically, that the only assignment that is not appropriate for an RPN on that unit would be a fresh transplant. And so that helped us narrow down our options, and also helped us clarify to the staff how the assignments should be organized. And so that's why it's so important to consult your stakeholders, because we are not the experts by any means. We are the individuals that are just trying to facilitate. We've identified a gap and we're just trying to facilitate that. And I do see a follow-up in terms of any ONA challenges. Jackie, we didn't have any ONA challenges. I think it was by the time, specifically with the unit-specific guide and the staffing assignments piece, I think that the staff was already pretty informed that they shouldn't be receiving any fresh transplants. And so we didn't come across any challenges from a union perspective. The RPNs were well integrated and were well supported, and we didn't come across any of those types of issues. Excellent questions. Yeah.
I just want to point out that you're giving a lot of ideas to our participants if they were to implement a similar initiative in their own organization. So thank you for this engaging discussion. I think I have another question. The question is that if you were to repeat this project in another area, what might you do differently?
It's a very good question. To be fully transparent, I would probably not go along with the two-pronged approach at the same time. If I were to do this initiative again, I would focus potentially on role clarity. One of the challenges that I went through with this project, and the reason why I actually ended up having to do a two-pronged approach with my colleague, was that we identified multiple, beyond role clarity, we had identified sense of belonging to be another priority. And so we had competing priorities in this particular project, with role clarity being the main one. So what we tried to do was address both issues simultaneously. And I think that especially if you're introducing an initiative for the first time, it's better to focus on one approach and have that as being your main focus, as opposed to having two different approaches. It worked out very well in our case. So it's not necessarily something that I would recommend avoiding per se, because it also depends on your sample size, right? It depends on how many individuals are fully in the unit, your buy-in, a multitude of factors. But if I were to roll out this initiative again, I would more closely focus perhaps on the role clarity aspect, more so than the mentorship initiative, because I found I didn't get to really go in depth with that mentorship initiative. I got to have conversations with the mentees and mentors in terms of how are things going, do bi-weekly check-ins, assist with the learning plans and the relationship contracts, but I didn't really feel that I could put equal effort and equal attention in both approaches. So that would be what I would do differently, perhaps just focus on role clarity.
Thanks, Kins. I'm just checking my messages in the chat. Are there any more questions? So I don't see any more questions. So I think we're ready to wrap up. Thank you again. So we've really had such an engaging discussion today. And as we prepare to wrap up today's webinar, I would like to thank everyone for taking the time out of your day to take part in today's presentation. So for those of you who are participating today, you will soon receive a link to an online survey to evaluate today's webinar presentation. So after you have done the evaluation, you will receive your certificate of attendance. In addition, please let us know of any suggested topics that you would like us to work on. So thank you again, Kinza.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. So I just wanted to say that this work is funded by the Government of Ontario. And if you want more information about the RNAO Best Practice Champions Program, you can visit us at our RNAO website. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of your day.